invitation. It's nice to be here for one reason. The reason is that I believe Tangent is going to move into our new house. And I feel like I want to start creating some connections with what is going to be the future of entrepreneurship and the space and this beautiful campus. And I like Joe. Joe is very proactive. He's a nice guy. He has an Italian last name, so all things that I like. No, really, I always appreciate when students engage so much in new things like he's doing, and I always think it's nice to reward people for what they do, and I think that what Joe is doing is really valuable. Now, this is the end of good news for today. Now let's talk about bad news. Bad news is about how tough it is to start and grow a successful business, right? This is, for those of you who had me in class, I recognize some faces, especially at master level. You probably know that my approach is, I wouldn't call it pessimistic, but rather realistic. Certainly, by being realistic, sometimes I ended up being pessimistic. And the reason is quite simple. Founding and growing a business is really tough. It takes time, it requires sweat and blood, and even if you put in sweat and blood and cash and money and the ideas, well, chances are you might not succeed, right? So at the end of the day, this is totally fine, right? It's totally fine to fail. In fact, if you think about how entrepreneurship is discussed these days, is about, oh, no matter if you fail. Fail once, fail twice, fail 3 times, fail 4 times. Well, that's fine. Failure is part of success, if you will. But then I would argue there are multiple ways to fail, right? You can fail and lose everything, or you can fail and remain afloat and being able to navigate turbulent waters in a way that will allow you to have another chance down the line, right? So what I'm going to talk briefly with you today, and this is not meant to be an academic class, it's just going to be a chat between friends or quasi-friends, is about how can you lower the risk of failure? And even if you fail, let's assume you all be failing at least once. What's there to be learned, right, through a failure? One thing that I've learned myself, not just in class or by being a professor in entrepreneurship, but engaging with an enterprise. I am one of the co-founder of a business that has today offices in Turkey and in Italy, and we're about to open a new office in the US, is about the importance of market and industry knowledge, okay? If I reflect on my case, for me it was absolutely key to team up with people coming from the industry, right? Who maybe didn't have a broad vision of how things were working in other sectors. Maybe they were missing somehow a broader perspective of things, but certainly if you look at the industry where they are competing, they know a lot, right? And I will insist on this, right? I believe that one major point for you guys is that almost by definition, your expertise in specific fields is limited unless you have worked in specific industries before. But the plus that you bring into new businesses is that you have a broad view of things, right? And this is what we are trying to install in you in classes like the creative thinking module that I taught last semester, right? So the combination of people who knows exactly what happens within industry and people like you who bring in fresh hairs and new ideas, I believe is the right place. Okay, so this is the major takeaway. Now let me guide you through how I want to land, right, to this last slide, which is about the combination of fresh knowledge and specialized knowledge. Now, this is me, doesn't matter who I am. What matters more is this, right? I want to start this little talk by presenting you a case that you all know, right? Well, you all know about Google Plus, I suppose. I guess that very few of you have ever engaged with Google Plus. I myself tried, but I gave it up suddenly. But nonetheless, I got a message from Google a few days ago who say, "Dear Giulio, your account is going to be shut down in April." And the reason, and they were quite straightforward in telling me that, the reason is simply put, we have no people in our network, so this is not meant to continue. right? As simple as that. Now, this is good news and bad news. Why is this good news? Good news is that, relax. If you fail, you'll be in good company, right? If Google fails, right, then what's wrong if you fail, right? The bad news is that if Google, perhaps one of the most successful and celebrated companies in the world, was not able, with all the money, with all the skills, with all the bright minds that they have, to put together a new idea and make it work, then it means that coming up with something solid that generates money in a sustainable way, that's pretty difficult, right? If Google failed, then yes, we're all entitled to fail, but at the same time, that's a red flag, right? A red flag is, guys, this is tough. And I don't want to discourage you any further, but maybe I won't, by saying that 90% of startups fail. And you may say, well, that's actually optimistic, right? That's actually optimistic. Because in fact, statistics say that 95% of startups fail. But I omitted a detail. 90% of startups fail within a year, right? Which is, it's actually good news for you, because one thing you don't want to be is to be in a relationship with a person that you know is going to take you anyway. So we better stop it before we invest resources into it. And this analogy, I think it works pretty well. And it allows me to make this statement. The fact that you fail again is not a problem, but two things I will ask you to do. One, fail lightly, don't compromise yourself. And B, try to learn outside of failure, right? This is my favorite slide. If you ever taken any of my course, this is the beginning of perhaps lots of conversation I had in class, which is about why startups or new ideas or new business fail, right? And the top reason why new businesses fail is because basically there's nobody who is willing to buy your product or your service at the price that you're proposing on the market, right? Basically, there's no market demand. And this is, I would call it a syndrome of the modern entrepreneur, okay? We all tend to fall in love with our ideas. We all tend to believe that what we are proposing to the market is breakthrough, is new, is radically new. While in fact, two things are true and are quite the opposite of what I just said. A, most of innovation is not breakthrough, but it's incremental innovation, which means that it improves, it ameliorates things that already exist. B, that if it's breakthrough, you need to ask yourself, why is that? Nobody on earth has ever done it before you. And the options are two, and you know what are the options. Either you're a genius, right? Or you're not a genius, to put it nicely. Or you have underestimated what the market is up to. Okay? So starting from here, where would you go, right? Probably you would all agree with me that the natural way of tackling this problem is to know the market, right? Engage with the market, right? And this is why you took modules, some of you did, of deep customer analysis, right? Drawing customer persona, guessing what Bob wants, what Jennifer wants, blah, blah, blah. I like that. It's cool, it's nice, but it's not enough, right? In reality, and this is not reinventing the wheel, there are three major ways whereby you can get to know a market, right? And I insist on the market because unlike what many people would say these days, oh, I have to pitch in front of an investor because I need money. I have to pitch in front of a professor to get a first. Yeah, that matters, but in reality, if you'll ever succeed, it's because the market will make you succeed, right? It's not the VC funds or the private equity funds that will make you succeed. They will give you the tools to succeed, but eventually it's the market that has the answer for your business. So how do you assess the market? There are three, well, this is a bit simplified, but three major ways that you can start looking at to collect information about the market. The first, which is the broader, has to do with industry and market report, right? There's a lot of stuff out there that you can read. This is mostly secondary data, so data that has been previously analyzed by somebody else, that you can start from to get a sense of what's new in the industry, right? If you work in the pharmaceutical industry, which is an industry I'm studying these days, what I would do, as not just as an entrepreneur, but as a scientist, is to sit down and read stuff, right? What is going on in the pharmaceutical industry these days? Who are the key players? What are the regulations, right? Where's innovation coming from? Who is doing innovation and who is not? What are the barriers, right, preventing new companies to succeed in that field, right? So let's start broad. Let's understand what are the boundaries of an industry, right, and what's happening these days. But then you need to narrow it down, right, and try to get a sense of what really the market wants, right? And of course, now this is, as I say, this is simplified, but when you start analyzing the market, certainly in parallel, you're building your own idea, right? So the two things are tightly intertwined. It's not that you do a market analysis and then you sit down and say, okay, what is there to be done? As you progress with your market analysis, certainly many ideas will come up, right? At some point, you're going to focus on a few ideas. And the point is, how do you bring them forward, right? So one way to go, and I see many of my students doing it, is to do a surveys or interviews, right? So what they do is they put together a questionnaire, 20 questions. They go out of the main gate, start stopping people and asking questions about, would you buy my veggie burger for 5 euros? Or would you not, right? Some of them will send surveys back home and have all the families filling out surveys. But mom will always tell you that you're the best kid in the room, right? So I believe, and this is it's not just me saying this, there are multiple ways, there are multiple theories out there that shows how it's easy for you to manipulate surveys, right? Not just manipulate surveys in that you cheat, but you do that without knowing you're doing it. You create questions, you structure your survey in a way that you know you're forcing people to answer what you want to hear from them, right? So I'm not saying surveys do not work, but I'm always skeptical when students come to me and say, oh, and I ask, how do you know the market? Oh, here's a survey. Well, here's a survey as a nice way to get further knowledge, but I don't believe it is enough. Well, in fact, these two first options are taken alone are necessary, certainly, necessary but not sufficient. And even when combined, they are necessary but not sufficient. To me, a proper market analysis comprises all 3 steps, and I want to insist a little bit more on the last step, which is the most important to me, but also the most challenging for you guys. Okay? Now, this is how you have to envision the 3-step process that underlies a proper market analysis, right? On the one hand, you have a breadth of market knowledge, right? You start broad understanding all the dynamics or most of the dynamics marking an industry. And as you progress, right, you narrow it down, right? By narrowing down, of course, you increase the depth of the knowledge, right? So the secret, which is not, again, reinventing the wheel here, is combining you having a broad perspective of what the market wants, but at the same time, right, moving down and trying to focus on one specific item, which is where you're going to develop your successful idea, right? What is a prototype, and why I believe the prototype is the means, is the option that will allow you to collect proper feedback from them. Okay? Now, you know probably about the lean startup method, and I'm not here to repeat something that you have studied before. And if you don't know what the lean startup method is, then I suggest you to read a book or some of the papers that have been published on this matter. I'm not going to talk about it today. What I'm going to talk about it, though, today is that in the parlance of the lean startup method, a prototype, it's called an MVP, a minimum viable product. The two things are the same thing, okay? A prototype or a minimum viable product are exactly the same thing for what matters here today. Now, a prototype or an MVP starts from you building it, right? And it can be a beta version of software. It can be, as I will discuss later on, you open up a pop-up stores in Dublin just to showcase some of your new collections. It can be a food truck. in case you want to experiment new foods and see if your local demand is interested in buying that type of food from you, okay? It gets complicated when I will add this feature to this process, right? So building per se doesn't mean anything. You build a prototype to measure. Measure what? Measure whether your customers are interested in buying from you, whether the price you're selling is correct, whether the way you're selling is fine, right? Online, offline, and if offline, how, right? So as you build your prototype, you need to add features that will allow you to measure what are the questions that are confronting you, right? And as you test it on the market, you learn. Once you learn, this process continues, and you may need to build a second prototype where you adjust it, where you tweak your prototype based on what? Based on what you learned from the first iteration with the market. So this is a loop that continues. It goes on and on until you find, right, what you believe is the right formula, the right configuration of your product, your service, right, to be proposed, to be sold in the market. There's a problem. There's another problem. So yeah, and before talking about the next problem, let me step back a little bit and tell you something that I've been thinking about for quite a while. Is this old wine and new bottle, right? I don't know if you're familiar with product development, new product development discipline or theories, but in new product development, creating prototypes is a central part of the daily activity of engineering, designers, technicians. So what the Lean Startup has offered to us sometimes can be seen as a repetition of something that has long been existing in theory, right? But nonetheless, and you can think about, canvas of new clothing. You can think about, as I said before, pop-up stores that is commonly used by companies to test out new products in a new market. And you can think about a food truck when at times are used to introduce new product, new food in new locales. The reality is this easy, right? It is not easy. It is not easy. And although it can be indeed new wine and old bottle, there are many challenges that you need to be aware of when creating your product. The problem, if I can summarize it in this way, is that chances are you will be creating a prototype that sucks, right? And that's a problem. It is a problem because the message you're delivering to the market is the wrong message. You're telling the market that this is pretty much what you're going to offer them, and if that's their chance to understand what you're doing, if you're delivering an erroneous message to the market, chances are they won't come back to you. So it's very important that even from the first MVP, you engage with your market, right? And if you showcase, right, whatever, a software or a product, and that is far from being ready, let's forget about having something up and running, but something that is close to what you have in mind, then the problem are twofold. One, you may disappoint your customers, and they may not come back to you anymore because that's crap. B, you collect false feedback. You collect feedback on something that you know is not reflective on what you really have in mind, right? On the other hand, however, it's gonna be quite complicated for you to come up with something that is viable per se. The reason is that most likely when creating your prototype, you will be missing resources, financial, human resources, market knowledge, and most likely you won't be able to come up with something that is already in good shape. So the equilibrium, the synthesis of this, the balance lies in here, right? Your goal is to try to put together something that is decent enough to be proposed in the market, but knowing that you most likely won't be able to come up with something that is absolutely ready to go and be solid, okay? Attached to this, there is a conclusion. I'm going full speed to the end of this short presentation. The problem is this. The problem that I see is that when people say, oh, you need to build a prototype, most of you may think, okay, I know where to go. The reality again, the realities of entrepreneurship, the title of today, is that even to create an MVP, even the sole activity of creating an MVP is challenging, right? Creating an MVP, creating a prototype is all but easy. Yes, it's old wine in your bottle. Yes, we have been doing that forever. And then what? And then it's easy? It's not easy. In fact, it requires market-specific knowledge, right? Knowing how to put together a prototype. Think about developing a beta version of a software. That requires having a hell of expertise in that, right? Think about opening up driving a food truck and testing out pizzas in Dublin. Do you know how to make pizzas? Even if it's a prototype, it doesn't mean it's a joke. It has to be for real. So my interpretation of this is that there are ways to overcome this barrier, right? And I always try to tell my students and encourage my students to not to be afraid to engage with people that have in-depth expertise in a specific field, right? So team up with industry experts and insiders to speak, right? And think about it. When you get, if you'll ever get funded by a private equity or venture capital fund, you know what they do, right? Yes, they give you money, but most of the times they try to plug in, right, some knowledge from people in that field that can contribute to your business, right? One of my former students from last year, from the master last year, is working on a new concept of restaurant in town. He got funded, and immediately after he got funded, he had the investor bring it in. A restaurant owner in Dublin tried to help him out. So getting knowledge from people within your industry is fundamentally important, right? Don't think you can get it done alone unless you have spent time working in the field for at least a number of years and you know you possess the market knowledge that is required to put together a list, an MVP for the first iteration of the market. Third, which is a new trend popping up here and there. We have example here, Bank of Ireland. I wouldn't say most, but many large corporations are creating their own internal incubator or accelerator program, right? And that is meant to do what? That is meant to facilitate the circulation and development of new entrepreneurial ideas from within, okay? And they do that for two reasons. They have to react to fintech, in the case of Bank of Ireland, which is meant to, possibly not successfully, but we'll see, buy market share from Bank of Ireland. And they know that if the one way to stay alive is to continuously generate innovation, hence having an internal space dedicated to new entrepreneurial ideas is, for most of these big players, the way to go. How do I want to sum this up? Just with two simple figures, just with two simple ideas that reflect what we have discussed 10 minutes ago. And that goes back to the need of intersecting fresh new knowledge, breadth of knowledge, which is what I believe you can bring in a corporation, a new industry, in a new business. But also, at the same time, I think you need to be humble enough and you need to be smart enough to knock doors of people who knows much more than what you currently do. People who knows the industry inside out. Do you want to do business with them? Do you want to consult with them? Do you want to have them as your mentors? That's your call. But I hardly see anybody succeeding in business these days if you don't engage with people that most likely are slightly older than you, but certainly that possess those resources and knowledge that you are missing at the moment. All right? This is pretty much what I wanted to cover today. Thank you.
So I'm sure everybody
knows time?
Yeah, oh, we have plenty of time, Giulio. You have another 30 minutes of
30 minutes.
Yeah, for anybody have
I better take a seat.
Anybody have any questions for Giulio? I'm sure.
Hi.
Hi.
What's your name?
Amanda. You mentioned that the number one issue why startups fail was because of the lack of a market need. So my question is, if this has become, assuming this has become common knowledge that this is a challenge for startups, I guess my question is, why aren't they doing anything to overcome it, such as, you know, if a new startup comes into play, hire the right resources or the right team in order to tackle that?
That's a good question, and it's an obvious question, right?
Yeah.
Well, I see two reasons. One goes back to this. It's just one new bottle. Yes, it is, but nonetheless, people are not taking it seriously for two reasons. One, and you excuse me for making this comment. Most young entrepreneurs these days are not humble enough, right? They believe that, oh yeah, I have this idea. Oh, I study at Trinity. I'm really smart. I can. Doesn't matter. Oh, the surveys. Oh, people don't understand. They will understand, right? And trust me, lots of people think this way. And now I'm generalizing, right? I know that people are not like this. And the second is that testing out ideas, creating prototypes, it's a lot of work. So most of the times, as you start doing it, it's hell of work, and you're like, yeah, you know what? Maybe it's better if I convince myself that this is working. And so sometimes you don't want to see reality, right? And if you are the only one person who has to believe in something, right? Because if you don't believe in it, there's no way to move it forward. Then if you tell yourself that this is not going anywhere, then who's going to push it forward? So I think we are moving in this sense. We're moving to something that has to do with psychology, which is not my field, so I don't want to venture out there. But I believe that the entrepreneur, by definition, is a lonely business person, right? And sometimes facing reality, it costs lots of energy and lots of thinking. That's my interpretation of it. Would you agree, Joe?
I agree. 100%.
Hi, what's your name?
Yeah, Shiva. I'm from computer science department. Yeah.
Sorry?
I'm from computer science department, and the question
Oh,
is,
okay, fantastic.
you just mentioned the G plus, right? Why is it failing? So Google also, this was a second social media thing which failed. The prior one was Orkut, that was prior to Facebook era. After Facebook era, G plus also failed. So if you contrast both the scenarios, what would be your comment?
Of why they fail?
Yeah, Orkut and this.
Well,
also.
I can even add another example. I don't know if maybe you're too young. Well, not all of you. Some of you are too young to know it. But a few years ago, there was a new social media that was growing quite strongly. That was it's still called a small world. Have you ever heard a small world? None of you? Well, that speaks to how successful it was. I'm not an expert in social media platforms, but if I reflect on what I'm seeing these days, is that this is a game for a few players, right? In fact, one of the most common critiques that we post to Google, to Facebook, or to Instagram, which is basically the same thing, is that it's one way sold, right? It's a monopoly regime. So I believe where Google got it wrong is in thinking that they could have got people out of Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, while people, especially, this is what analysts say, in their 40s or 50s tend to be quite loyal to their initial platforms, and that's because the cost of switching is quite high. Once you create a dense network of people in your own space, it's hard to start from scratch and move to Google, where basically your contents are down to zero. Now, this is my interpretation. I'm not sure this is what caused Google Plus to fail. Certainly, it is one reason why Google Plus failed.
Yeah, actually, I think rather than calling it a monopolistic market, you can call it an oligopolistic market, where the Facebook looks in the inorganic growth by acquiring WhatsApp also. It acquired the WhatsApp. It was built by Neeraj Arora.
That is correct.
He was part of the M&A sessions in the merging. So inorganic growth of Facebook is more important than the organic growth of Google, I feel.
No, I would agree with you.
Thank you.
Although I wouldn't call that organic, because organic growth is when you grow internally. This is M&A. They did a merger and acquisition.
Yeah, inorganic, that's what I mean.
Oh, non-organic.
Yeah, inorganic.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi.
Hey, so you mentioned when you're developing an MVP, the sort of idea of, obviously having market research and market knowledge, but sort of thinking, why is yours going to succeed? Why hasn't someone done this already? What would you say would be advice to an entrepreneur for inverting their way of thinking and finding that weak spot in their argument or in their proposal?
If I had the answer to this. Well, as I say, there are multiple ways. I suppose that I would recommend you to start thinking this way. I always believe that we generally underestimate what the market wants. We don't really engage with the market. We first come up with a solution and then we try to push it, right? While I suppose it has to happen the way around. You need to have a pull approach, right? You need to first engage with the market and then come back and try to think what you can do to solve an existing problem. In fact, in any of my entrepreneurship classes, I never start from an idea. And this is not just me, most entrepreneurship professors will do that. We start from a problem, right? Can we find a problem currently affecting the life of people? It can be a social problem, it can be an economic problem, it can be a marketing problem, whatever that is, right? Can we find a problem? It can be a major problem, or it can be a stupid problem. But as long as there's nobody fulfilling that gap or trying to provide a solution that is cost effective, right, to that problem, that I believe there's room for doing something. The reason why I say cost effective is because most times you will find a problem, you'll find somebody already doing something to tackle that problem, but not in a way that you may deem cost effective, efficient, or effective, right? In many cases, I suppose the way of doing it is that of understanding who is doing what and trying to improve what people are already doing. And that's because once you engage with something and you start devoting resources into a business, it's hard for anybody to do it, right? To change the course of your business. You tend to like what you do, you tend to give a try to what you do. And there are plenty of examples of followers that took advantage of first mover advantage and outcompete them in the long term.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hey, well, if you say that starting an enterprise or starting entrepreneurship, you usually start with a problem, how come not more enterprises turn out to be social enterprises or have like a social entrepreneurship?
Because there's no money.
But like there can still be, profit of some sort. If
Yeah.
I'm trying to solve a problem, how come we can't solve it in a way that it
No.
benefits other people surrounding it?
That's a good point. Unfortunately, I have to say that because the chances of succeeding are so low, right? If you are an entrepreneur and want to do something, already knowing that most likely will fail, what you think is, okay, at least if I succeed, let me make some money out of it, right? And yes, you're right. There might be ways to make money out of the social enterprises, but let's be honest, it's much more difficult than coming up with an idea for profit, right? Now, is there a compromise between for-profit and non-for-profit? I think there is. If you read the work of Michael Porter's on share value, I think that's a nice spin to this specific dilemma, which is, can you create economic value while tackling social issues? Apparently, yes. And if you think about all this idea of corporate social responsibility, right? Corporate social responsibility, in a way, it is a social innovation, right? You are creating value for society. But who of you would not agree that most of companies are implementing CSR policies to become more appealing in the market, right? To sell more, right? So what's the threshold? What are the boundaries of the two things? I think this is very important. Do they talk to each other? Can they coexist? It's hard, but maybe they can. Well, yeah, it's not. I'm thinking, right? But it's not social innovation, but Whole Foods, right? Whole Foods has implemented a lot of policies supporting, right, rural businesses. Right? So that's a social implication for what they do, but the business is for profit. And by the way, because they are doing so much for disadvantaged people, that becomes a strong competitive advantage to appeal to, wannabe politically correct people that in the end drive a Tesla has a lot of money. So two things can go hand in hand. Hi.
Ask you,
Hi.
if diversity is secondary source, primary source, and the prototype, it means that people don't know how to read that. Why?
Yes, it could be, but also, let me go back. Let's stop here. So I believe that reading secondary data, it's harder than what people believe. If I tell you, and if I tell my students, okay, I want to know everything about the pharmaceutical industry in Ireland, okay? Most of them will fail to bring me a solid report whereby I can understand how the industry works, right? So reading secondary data is already a challenge. It's not just about putting together a few papers and coming up with something that will make sense. It's about understanding inside out what are the major dynamics characterizing the industry. And that's where already I see problems coming up. Service, as already said, is complicated, per se. I believe that if you want to put together a real and a serious service, you need to know statistics, right? Sampling, for instance, sampling. Sampling is a major component of service. How do you select your sample? So people taking classes of statistics to know how to sample, right? And while people underestimate that and say, okay, my sample is my family. That's yours. And if you put together the wrong sample, all the surveys is shit.
You just say one thing that picking the something. When you develop, but this is about developing personas. Sometimes you even know which is your persona. I don't know.
That's why I don't like much the drawing. It's nice if you want to draw some persona and see what Bob likes and Bob doesn't like. That's fine. But at the end of the day, right? Yes, this might be problematic. Yes, there are, as you progress, I would say, not only the depth of knowledge increases, but also the complexity of what you increases, right? Here it's difficult, but it's not impossible. Here becomes very tough. And putting up a sound prototype is very challenging. So I believe it's an incremental process, even in terms of the knowledge that it requires and the complexity that you have to be able to face. And that's why you need resources. You need people that knows things perhaps more than you. You need to be humble enough to knock the door and say, hey, I don't know how to go from here. Can you help me out? Is this a bomb? Yes.
What would you say is the most efficient way just to educate a new market on product or your prototype?
What do you mean educate?
Like, let's say if it's something with innovation or innovative product with design, you gotta educate them on how to use your product or how to come about your product.
I'm already skeptical. If you say educate the market, it means that what you're trying to offer them is far away from solving any issue that they feel it's important to them, right? So the most innovative ideas, in fact, are the easier to sell, right? It doesn't take any explanation or any education. I have a problem, I'm solving a problem. I, as a customer, realize the value of your solution, and I go for that, right? The fact that you need to explain and to educate, it already makes me think that it's something complicated about what you're trying to offer that the market might not be able to understand and therefore be willing to pay money.
It is something in virtual reality or augmented reality, which mostly haven't invested in the markets yet. So that would be the case where you would educate the markets on your product or service, isn't it?
Well, I believe that a prototype can also mean testing out something, but also introducing something new to the market and see what is the reaction from people that you believe is part of your target, right? You think about it's a different business, but what is a pop-up store, right? A pop-up store is yes a way to collect feedback, but also a way to showcase it, right? So you say, oh, think about what IKEA is doing in many major cities. Now IKEA, I don't know if you noticed, is opening pop-up stores in city centers, right? Why is IKEA doing that? IKEA is trying to think whether there's something more than having a huge mall at the outskirts of city. The new question is, can we have little shop in city center? Would that be something customers are willing to shop at? So what we do is to put together pop-up stores. I saw them in Toronto, saw them in Frankfurt, where they're testing out what? The products are always the same. But they're introducing a new concept to the market and they're telling their customers, if I tell you that you don't need to take a bus and go half an hour outside the city, but you can shop from within the city, maybe when you finish working and a bank. Would that appeal to you, right? So at the same time, I believe you're testing out something, but you're also educating the market that there's something there that they might not have thought about, which might become available very soon.
There's some extra avenue for advertising for IKEA, so they can drive online business as well.
Absolutely. In that case, that's absolutely true. So I believe that goes back. So think about for software, think about beta version. What is a beta version? It's a way to test it out, but it's also a way to introduce it, right? To make people talk about it, right? It might not be perfect, but you say it's beta. When you say it's beta, people know, oh, that's not perfect. But it's already in the market, so people get to know about it. Now the problem, and I don't want to overcrowd this conversation, is that one problem with launching a prototype is that you're exposing yourself to competition. So the moment you hit the market with a prototype, your competitors will know. So do you know how to protect your ideas? Have you patented it? Do you have any copyright? How does it work? So that's why putting together and launching a prototype, it's tough. It's really, it requires a lot of things. From legal to marketing to operations to finance, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I would be super happy if any of my students from the master will end the year with a prototype. I will cry. I will be the happiest person in Trinity. The reality is that few of them will be able to get there by the end of the year. They will eventually, but no, even in 1 year time, not even. So see, this is why, and I know you, Paul, have been working on something similar in the past. This is why you need seed capital. In most of the times, is meant to help you with creating the first unit, the first prototype. That's what seed capital is for. So when you're asking for seed capital, sometimes investors ask for, oh, show me the product, but there's no product. There can't be any product. I need your seed capital to create the first version of the product. So that's something you need to be very careful in explaining when you meet investors, seed investors, right? There's no product. There might be a rough technology. There might be an idea, but most likely you need that seed capital to create the prototype, not vice versa. Yeah.
So a couple of us are actually taking an international entrepreneurship class now.
With Sinead?
With Sinead, yeah. And actually this week's reading material was all about how there's this debate in literature between discovery theory versus creation theory, and how, you know, there's a philosophy that entrepreneurs are either discovering opportunities or they're creating opportunities. I was just curious if you yourself leaned more towards one or the other, and also like what you. I
believe there's a big confusion when we talk about innovation, and the confusion is that we tend to think of innovation as invention. Mm-hmm. Invention and innovation are two separate things. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I don't believe entrepreneurs are responsible for discovery. Mm-hmm. They're responsible for detecting and seizing opportunities. Mm-hmm. Discovery is for science. Mm-hmm. Discovery is for applied science, what you and I discussed before. Mm-hmm. Out of invention, it takes entrepreneurs to translate invention to innovation, and eventually again to economic value. That's my take on it, right? But yes, she's very good, by the way.
Yeah.
Are you same goal?
Yes. My question would be, because you mentioned, you know, the issues of how startups fail. Do you have any indicators where entrepreneurs should be humble enough to realize, actually, this idea I've prototyped enough and it's actually not going to be successful? Like, where should they pull out, especially from economic behavior?
Oh, I had a guy in my master last year who did a prototype, and then it didn't work out, and the guy was working on this idea already before coming to Trinity to do the master. So he was working on it for at least 1 year, then he joined the master. While he was doing the master, he came up with a prototype. We tested out, and the figures were just negative, and he bailed out. He done the idea.
So you say the indicators, there's no set measures, it's more unique to the prototype, unique to the startup.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think about, I don't know if I'm skipping a bit, about those companies like Uber, Airbnb? I don't think it's about the innovation. They didn't invent the real.
Oh, but they're great companies.
No, No, I mean, what I mean is, you know, they are not owner, like for example Uber, you know, they don't own any taxi company. The model of the business is.
Oh, sure. We all know that they have introduced. Well, first of all, they're very similar. To me, they're the same thing, right? The logic behind Uber and Airbnb is the same. They're exploiting extra capacity that is available these days. Whether it's your time, it's your car, it's your house, right? There's an oversupply of things, right? Think about it this way. It's an oversupply of things that nobody's making use of. And they're reconverting some of this oversupply to create economic value in the market by connecting simply supply and demand, right? What's interesting about them, however, is that, and I don't think this is a pure coincidence, they have succeeded into very old, very mature, very not innovative industries. Taxis and hotels, which are all slow, nasty, annoying, and you try to get a taxi in Dublin and you get crazy if you don't have cash in your hand. Tell me what other business in Dublin will not accept a credit card? Nobody, a taxi. So this is perfect for disruption. If you see industries like this, which are protected by regulation, and airlines were the same. If you read the book of Michael O'Leary, which I recommend you to do, you'll see that why Ryanair succeeded. Yes, because the guy was a genius, and in fact he studied at Trinity, but also because he targeted an industry that was absolutely slow, where there was no innovation, that was highly subsidized, that was perfect, ready for disruption. So Ryanair, Uber, and Airbnb to me are the same thing. Well, different, but the logic is to insist on industries that are all are not functioning well, and that's where you can really make an impact. So my first suggestion would be, if you were like some student of mine can come to me and say, I don't know where to start. I have no idea where to start. I have passion for nothing, or passion for something that is not, well, for tennis or for whatever, but it's not an industry. Then I say two things. First, try to focus on major trends, demographic trends, right? Brexit, people from Africa moving up to Europe. Those things won't be stopped, right? There's a whole bunch of people now relocating to Portugal. I don't know if you know that. What does it mean? This is new market need that's being created every day. A. Or people coming to Dublin, and that won't stop, right? 2,000 people more coming to work at Google, Facebook, blah, blah. So target on major trends in society, right? Aging population, need for caregivers, whatever. B, focus on old industries with regulation and subsidies that have so far prevented innovation taking place, right? I like personally, and I don't want to bother you with craft beer, but I studied craft beer in the past, and that was another industry that was low, was not reacting to market demand, was highly concentrated, and that was perfect for disruption. In fact, it happened, right? This is where I would start. I wouldn't, on the opposite, I wouldn't venture out. I wouldn't think about segments which are already overcrowded. Food delivery. For what? No chance. No. In fact, they're bailing out. They're leaving the country. Don't go where people go. It's obvious, but yet it's easy sometimes, right? To just follow the mainstream.
One more question? Any more? Otherwise, Giulio's got to go.
Joe, I want a question from you now.
You want a question from me?
To see if you pay attention to what I say.
No, I have a question for you then. So you have a lot of people who would go in the invention category, right? People who have done a lot of research and come up with a really good invention. A lot of times they would have an apprehension to take the step towards innovation. There's more of a directive towards writing a paper. How would you encourage those people to take that step? If you're the innovator who has an idea, how do you encourage them to?
Oh, I would try to show them what is the potential of their idea in economic terms. So that's why I believe there's a lot of scope here for people like you who have a business background. Oh well, you have almost to talk to people who are scientists, who are inventors, and just to team up with them and show and explain what can happen if that invention is brought to the market, right? The idea of having a speed date here at Trinity, I think, is fantastic. Bring the same room people that have tech knowledge, applied science knowledge, with people like you who have business background. They can show what are the possibilities if the two body of knowledge merge. That is what I will do. Guys, thank you for your attention. I hope this was not too boring. If it was too boring, now it's lunchtime. So that's the good news.
Thank you so much.